Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for attending this session with us, and welcome to the third and final session of the 2021 Greater Kansas City Peace Building Conference. This year, we've been hosting a couple of months of peace focused on the theme, Healing Our Polarized Societies. This conference is co-sponsored by Johnson County Community College and the Center for Global Peace Journalism at Park University. My name is Louis Duguid. I was a longtime journalist with the Kansas City Star, and now I'm an author, lecturer, freelance writer, and political action committee chair for the National Association for Multicultural Education. Today, I'm your moderator. First, some housekeeping. We are recording this session, so if you have concerns about that, please take the appropriate steps now, such as turning off your video. For those individuals who are joining us via Zoom, please be sure to mute yourself for the benefit of the speaker and the rest of the audience. For those joining us virtually, if you have any questions for our presenter, please put them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. Here in the live audience at St. Mark, Hope, and Peace Lutheran Church, please raise your hand if you have a question. I will share your thoughts with our presenter, who will leave time at the end of her program to provide answers. Our 2021 Greater Kansas City Peace Building Conference began September 16 with Michael Collins, Executive Director for the Americas at the Institute for Economics and Peace. His virtual presentation was titled Positive Peace, Empowering the Peace Builder We Each Have Within. The second session was on October 6th at Park University. Ray Rose Williams, a columnist and editorial board member for the Kansas City Star, spoke with us on the media as a tool to heal polarized societies. You can find the recorded sessions online by Googling Johnson County Community College and Peace Building. Today, we will hear from the Reverend Dr. Donna J. Simon. Reverend Simon serves as pastor at St. Mark Hope and Peace Lutheran Church, and she is the director for the ecumenical mission of the Central States Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. In both capacities, she is focused upon mission, service, and justice for all persons. Reverend Simon holds a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature from San Francisco State University, a Master's of Divinity from Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary in Berkeley, California, and a Doctor of Ministry from Lutheran Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. She was ordained extraordinarium in Kansas City on October 28, 2000, and is past dean of ELCA congregations in Greater Kansas City and Lawrence, Kansas. St. Mark Hope and Peace is a new urban congregation engaged in a process of intentional renewal, which centers upon engagement with what God is doing in the Midtown area of Kansas City and beyond. The congregation worships in this beautiful old stone church on Troost Avenue, but its ministry is located in many places. They have formed many fruitful ecumenical relationships and partnerships with organizations working to create a more just and equitable world for all. Reverend Simon lives in the parish. She serves with her wife, Colleen, their son, Dominique, and several cats and dogs. This evening, the Reverend Simon will speak with us on healing our polarized societies with a living wage. Ladies and gentlemen, the Reverend Dr. Donna J. Simon.
Thank you, Louis, and thank you to Johnson County Community College and the Center for Global Peace Journalism at Park University for the invitation to close out this wonderful conference. In particular, I'd like to, and I'm looking at Jeanette, in particular, I'd like to thank the organizers for getting the name of our church correct in every print resource. When you have 7 words in the name of your church, we really appreciate it when people get it right. And because every time someone gets our name right, a little hope and peace go out into the world. I want to start this evening. Hello to everybody on Zoom and to everyone who will watch this on recording. Please, there will be some resources at the end, which I recommend to you. I will also make sure that everyone can reach me. So if you have questions that we don't get answered tonight, or you want to continue this conversation, I'm really happy to do that. I want to start tonight by telling you a little bit of my background and why it was impossible to say no to the invitation to talk about peace building and living wages. I grew up kind of ordinary, had a suburban upbringing. We moved a lot. We lived in the upper Midwest, the deep South, and the West Coast before I started high school. But I was not a particularly radical child. And even in college, I tended to walk by the tent city of protest on the quad at San Francisco State. San Francisco State, you may know, is one of the most protesting colleges in the country. It was the site in the late 60s of a strike, a student strike that actually shut down the university. And San Francisco State University students take that right to protest very seriously. So during most of my undergrad and then graduate years there was almost always a tent city about apartheid, about the Intifada happened at that time. Now I've dated myself. One of the Intifadas anyway. While I was at San Francisco State, would generally walk by to get to the humanities building, which, because it was the humanities building, was out on the outskirts of campus. And then I went to Berkeley for seminary. And while at Berkeley, I took this class, The Spirituality and Practice of Christian Nonviolence, with Louis Vitale, Father Louis Vitale, and Ken Budigan at the Franciscan School of Theology of Berkeley. Berkeley has a consortium of seminaries. There's a Franciscan school, a Jesuit school, a Dominican school. So man, if you want to learn some Catholic theology as a Lutheran, it's a good place to go. So I took this class with Father Louis and Ken, Spirituality and Practice of Christian Nonviolence. They are the principals of a wonderful organization focused on nonviolent action called Pace Bene. Pace Bene, you may know, means peace and all good. It was a phrase offered as a greeting by St. Francis and St. Clare of Assisi. They would meet people and say, Pace Bene. They stole that greeting, though, from this other guy, Jesus. According to the 10th chapter of Luke and the 10th chapter of Matthew, when Jesus sent out his disciples, I promise I'm not going to turn this into a sermon, but this part is relevant. When Jesus sent out 70 disciples to ready the towns of Palestine for his arrival, he told his disciples to go out into the towns and villages and to say to people when they arrived, peace be to this house. And if they are people of peace, Jesus said, your peace will return to you. And if not, then move along. It's good advice. If we're going to be people of peace, if we're going to be people who build peace, as this conference suggests we should be, we have to be face to face. Internet petitions and Facebook posts may move the needle a little bit, but nothing is going to change until we look each other in the eye and recognize our common humanity, and then recognize that our futures are caught up together. That's what I learned from Louis and Ken at the Franciscan School. I also learned in that class to use my body as a tool of nonviolent peacemaking. One of the requirements of the class was you had to go to an action. So several of us went to an action sponsored by a group called Religious Witness with Homeless People at the Wary Housing Project in the newly closed Presidio Army Base. They closed the Presidio in San Francisco, and they had all this housing. And so Religious Witness with homeless people, knowing that at that time and for years before and to this day, there is an incredible number of folks, there are an incredible number of people experiencing homelessness in San Francisco. Religious Witness said, so give us the Wary Housing Project out on the Presidio, and we'll turn that into housing. They have 455 units of housing. And Religious Witness wanted it to be converted to housing for people experiencing homelessness. So at that action, I watched a Lutheran pastor, Jeff Johnson, a guy I know, chain himself to an abandoned townhome and get arrested. It was a seminal moment in my preparation for ministry, and I knew that what Pastor Jeff was doing was profoundly faithful and that I would be doing it too. However, the moment that I truly found my vocation as a nonviolent peace activist was in the winter of 2012, when we opened our church to Occupy Kansas City. Daniel, did you come over with Occupy? And that guy right there, Daniel Tucker and Mike Enriquez, and some of the most amazing organizers in this city and beyond, who had been living out in Penn Valley Park with Occupy Kansas City, came into this church for the winter. And by the following spring, the leaders of that group had formed an organization that was then and is still known as Stand Up KC, one of the first outposts of the national Fight for 15 movement. The Fight for 15, you may know, is a movement to raise the minimum wage and provide union protections for low-wage workers. This is the Fight for 15 website. And of course, it opens with a video of Stand Up KC, because Stand Up KC looks better than any other group. And this is a KC Star article about the last Stand Up KC strike this May. That is the great Terrence Wise speaking at the podium. And the tiny, you can see a little bit of my face, because of course we're all wearing masks. From the beginning, Stand Up KC and the Fight for 15 chapters have used the tools of nonviolent organizing learned from Dr. King, from Mahatma Gandhi, from the LGBTQIA rights organization Soul Force, from the women of Liberia, and so many others. And also that peace activist, Jesus, whose nonviolent resistance is well documented in a book that many have read and few have understood. All right, so building peace with a living wage, can it be done? Yes. Do I have evidence of that position? Yes, I have access to Google. I can show you charts and I can show you graphs, but we're not going to start with those charts and graphs because I want to talk about people first. This huge problem, and it's a huge problem, the economic inequity in this country, the growing distance between the people who live in the upper echelons of our economic stratosphere and the people who are scratching out a living on the other end, is a huge, huge problem. And it's about people. It's not about economics and it's not about market forces. It's about people. So let's talk about people. And we're going to start with rich people and move on quickly from there. In both 2019 and 2020, you may know the wealth of the richest 1% of Americans increased by $4 trillion. $4 trillion per year. From 30.35 trillion in the fourth quarter of 2018 to 38.1 trillion in the fourth quarter of 2020. That's an increase of over 27% in 2 years. The richest Americans have so much money, they are literally fighting to see who can build the biggest spaceship. I wish that was a joke, but we all know it's not. Now, one telling thing about these statistics, if you look at the chart that's up on the screen, whatever screen you're looking at, language is important. Notice how people are described on this chart. Top 1%, bottom 50%. This is how we talk about people. We talk about the top and the bottom. And how do you think people feel when they're in the top and the bottom? And it's not unusual. This language is not unusual. Try and find an article about the wealth gap that actually doesn't call the 1% the top. Here's a CNBC article. Here's USA Today. Here's my very favorite, the Pew Research Center. Top, top, top. Top, bottom. These terms are pretty loaded ways of talking about people. So let's talk about the people who have been promised opportunity for their hard work, but who seem to be relegated to the lower tiers on these charts and graphs. According to the Brookings Institution, 44% of American workers between 18 and 64 are in low-wage work. Brookings has a bit wider definition for low-wage work than we do in the Fight for 15. A small portion of the people in this study actually make a little more than $15 an hour, but they only go to 16, and the majority are definitely what we would consider to be low-wage workers. And as we're going to see, a little over $15 an hour is still not enough to get by in the US in 2021. Even more troubling, women, Black Americans, Latino Americans, and Indigenous persons are overrepresented in low-wage work. As the pay gets lower, the overrepresentation increases. This is a side-by-side comparison of workers from the National Employment Law Project. I have citations for everything that I'm showing and reading. So I'm happy to share that with folks because you can find a chart that to say just about anything. So I try to be very clear about where my sources are and happy to share sources with people. So this is Brookings Institution. Actually, no, I'm sorry. This is the National Employment Law Project. So the blue line in this chart represents the share of workers in the workforce, the total share of workers, right? The red line represents their share of low-wage work. So for instance, in that first pair of bars, we see that women make up 46.9% of the total workforce, but 54.7% of workers making less than $15 an hour. In the second chart, African Americans make up 11.8% of the workforce, but 15% of the workers making less than $15 an hour. Latinos are 16.5% of the workforce and 23.2% of low-wage workers. And that final line where the percentages flip, that's white people who are overrepresented in the workforce making over $15 an hour. And as I said, the overrepresentation of women and people of color increases as the pay decreases. Here's fast food work, something with which we are familiar. In fast food work, the industry that was the first target of the Fight for 15, the share looks like this. Women, who are, remember, 46.9% of the workforce, make up 71.1% of fast food workers. African American and Latino persons, who are 11.8 and 16.5% of total workers, represent 21.4 and 26.2% of fast food workers, respectively. According to payscale.com, the average fast food worker makes $9.17 per hour. So that is the bottom of the wage scale. Other restaurant work can pay even less because it's tipped work, but fast food work tends to pay a straight wage, as they call it. The wage of fast food workers, however, you may have seen went up 10% in the second quarter of 2021, according to Black Box Intelligence and Snagajob. That increase, you can probably guess, has mostly been attributed to the labor shortage in that sector. So we'll see whether these increases continue. We know that there have been increases in this sector due largely to the work of the Fight for 15 and the movement that has demanded better pay, in particular in the fast food sector. It's all that marching around we do in Chicago. I hope that the increases do continue because we have a crisis in this country and it's affecting every person and every community. Everyone. This is an opinion piece in US News. The American dream of upward mobility is broken. Ouch. One sentence from this article. In the US, 8% of children raised in the bottom 20% of the income distribution are able to climb to the top 20% as adults, while that figure in Denmark is nearly double at 15%. Economic mobility, generation to generation, is stalling in this country because we have generation after generation relegated to these lower echelons. What do we call it? The bottom. As generation after generation grows up, watching people working at the bottom of the wage scale, it's harder and harder to make it up out of those levels. It's become harder and harder to rise out of poverty in this country, and the dehumanizing grind of our poverty has gotten worse. As a culture, we should be shocked and ashamed that 44% of our workers could be described as the working poor. We should be shocked and ashamed that the richest country in the world has any people who should be described as the working poor. That should be an oxymoron. We were told as children that this country promises if we work hard, we will have advantages. And yet we have this whole category of people, almost half of our people, who can be described as working poor. A significant number of people in this country have been working hard and earning relatively less. Oh, sorry. According to the Economic Policy Institute, who we heard from in the first address of this conference, according to the Economic Policy Institute, the buying power of the minimum wage decreased by 21% between 2009, when it was last changed, 2009, when it became $7.25, and 2019. So in those 10 years, the buying power of the minimum wage decreased by 21%. And between 1968, when the minimum wage topped out, when the buying power of the minimum wage topped out, and 2019, it decreased by 34%. So minimum wage, the money that you earn making minimum wage has decreased by over, now these statistics are 2 years old, by over a third since 1968. A full-time worker being paid minimum wage, working 40 hours a week, if you can get 40 hours of work in a week as an hourly low-wage worker, a full-time worker being paid minimum wage, if they could work 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, because they're quite unlikely to also have any paid time off, that worker makes $15,080 a year before taxes. CNBC put together a nice graphic calculating whether one could live on that using data from researchers. MIT has a wonderful living wage calculator. Anybody seen it? Yeah, I've got a link to it in a slide at the end. You can go on to the living wage calculator at MIT and put in any place in the country, and they'll tell you what a living wage is for different family configurations. So the researchers at MIT gave some data to CNBC, and they put together these lovely graphics asking whether or not someone could live on minimum wage in various states in the country. Anybody want to, we'll put this out to the people watching on Zoom too. Anybody want to guess which states in the country you can actually afford to live in, making minimum wage? Did someone say Mississippi? I knew someone would say Mississippi. Yeah, no, it's none. Please stand by. I don't think I did anything, but you know.
Try it.
There we go. Thank you, Tavis. Tavis, everyone. I can't live without him. So here's a measure for every state in the country. A family of 4 with 2 working parents, both making minimum wage, and 2 children. The darker the box, the lower the percentage of livability for this family. So in the very dark blue boxes, 2 adults making minimum wage with 2 children can afford 40%. Basically, they make 40% of a livable wage. They can afford 40% of their basic needs. In just under half of the states, if you look at this nice little graphic, just under half of the states, a family earns 40% or less of what they need to meet basic needs. In no state in the country does a family in which 2 parents are both working full-time, making minimum wage, in no state in the country do they make over 85% of what is needed for their basic needs. Actually, it's 80% on this chart, sorry. Nobody makes more than 80% of what they need to meet basic needs. And if you take out the family, so, you know, okay, that's a family, right? This is the same chart for one single adult living alone, making minimum wage. There is not a state in the country where you can get above 85% of what you need to meet your basic needs. So that's the macro look. This whole country has a problem. And it's not a problem just for the people at the quote unquote bottom of the wage scale. It is a problem for all of us because that graphic is the whole country. Every state in this country, every place in this country has a problem with income inequity. So that's the macro look. What about a micro look? Staying with the fast food theme, here's a Big Mac. As I noted earlier, the buying power of the US minimum wage topped out in 1968. According to the Wall Street Journal, back then a Big Mac was 49 cents. And in 1968, minimum wage was $1.58 an hour. So on an hour's wage, a minimum wage worker could buy 3 Big Macs and still have 11 pennies left over for candy, and candy you could buy for a penny in 1968. Today, the federal minimum wage is $7.25, and a Big Mac is $3.99. So a minimum wage worker doesn't make enough in an hour to buy 2 Big Macs. Which means apparently, Daniel, wages aren't the main driver of inflation in the fast food sector, despite what we've heard. Okay, so but you can live without a Big Mac, right? You'd probably be better off if you did. We've all seen Super Size Me, right? Yeah. You can live without Big Macs, but how about something we can't live without? Here in Kansas City, like many other places in the country, housing prices are, what does the star say? Skyrocketing. According to the website apartmentguide.com, back in April, Kansas City had the highest jump in rent on a 1-bedroom apartment in the country. The average rent, According to apartmentguide.com, the average rent for a listed apartment is $1,435 for one bedroom, $1,774 for a two bedroom. Now that's listing data, okay? So that may be a little artificially high. If you look around though at other sites, all the sites that I looked at, a one bedroom apartment in Kansas City averages at between $950 and $1,300. A worker earning the minimum wage in Missouri, which is now $10.30 an hour, not bad, making $10.30 an hour, working full-time if they can get it, they make less than $1,500 per month. $10.30 an hour, working full-time, $1,470 per month. Try to rent a $1,400 apartment on your $1,400 salary. So that's pretty particular, right? And no one in the country is going without housing of some kind. For some of them, it's a car. There are people who work at McDonald's and Burger King who sleep in their car in the parking lot there. We know those people. We're not talking about an abstract wealth gap now. We're talking about our neighbors who work full-time and cannot pay rent in the city in which we live, a city that is still not egregiously difficult to afford. There certainly are places where housing is more expensive. But our housing has gone up enough that if you're making minimum wage, you better have roommates or public assistance. And if you work for McDonald's, they'll help you apply. We're talking about single parents who bring home enough money to pay for rent and some groceries, but maybe they have to send their kids to school in shoes that are too small until the tax refund comes. Or they pick up some overtime, or grandma sends some money. These are the decisions that people are making who are trying to survive on these wages. Okay, so I just threw a ton of numbers at everybody, at you, at the poor people who will watch this recorded. Threw a bunch of numbers at you, but we can't talk about healing our polarized society until we unpack the incredible economic inequity that is rolling like a tidal wave across communities in this country. Yes, poorer communities struggle with higher levels of gun violence. Yes, crime rates are higher where wealth is lower. But we've asked people to go without their most basic needs in order to keep the wheels spinning on the machine we call the economy. And after a while, some of them break. We're going to talk about what that breaking means for communities in a moment, a little bit. But I want to stay in this moment of particularity for a few minutes more. I reached out to one of the Stand Up KC workers, Bridget. Bridget has been a leader in Stand Up KC since the beginning, and she and her husband are raising a family, their children, other children sometimes, and they're working really hard. So I asked Bridget, tell us what it's like to be a low-wage worker in America, because I haven't been a person who's trying to raise a family on this. So I asked her, how does it affect you physically, emotionally? How does it affect your mental health to be living, and what would to be living on low wages, and what would a living wage mean to you? Here is some of what Bridget told me. If I made a living wage, I would not have gone 6 years without medical treatment and 6 years without seeing a dentist. I would not have had times where I went to bed hungry. I did, by the way, ask for permission to share this. I would not have dealt with homelessness, all of which contribute to a declining mental health status. I'm in constant fear of becoming homeless or my children not having enough food to eat. So poverty wages definitely affects mental health in various ways. It can contribute to people making irrational decisions, which lead to jail time, injury, and sometimes death. When you're constantly living on the brink, just trying to survive from day to day, you don't have the ability to think that things could be solved or that things will pass. You don't have the ability to think of what your future could hold. You don't have anything positive to focus on. If everyone made a living wage, they would have access to healthcare. They would have access to help with mental health. They would have access to food and shelter, all of these things that should be considered a human right. Our country prides itself on the American dream, and the reality is most Americans don't even have access to the American dream. We often hear Americans are lazy, Americans feel entitled, Americans just want handouts. The reality is we are not lazy. We do not want handouts. We simply want to be treated as a human being and have the ability to get the things that we need on our own. The reality is that we are not lazy. We are trapped. This is a photo from the very first Stand Up Casey action. It poured. It poured. Everybody was soaked. We have a dryer downstairs, one dryer. So we had people running downstairs all day long trying to get their clothes dry. That picture is from about a month later. This picture is from one of the trips to McDonald's headquarters just outside of Chicago. On the backs of the shirts that were handed out on that very first day, that very first strike, it says, "We are worth more." Every Fight for 15 chapter has their own shirts, but I like ours the best. Because they are the answer to the question we came here to answer today. How can we heal our polarized society of its economic evils? We build a society in which nobody ever feels trapped by their work. We build a society that not only tells workers that they are worth more, but shows them by ensuring that they can pay rent and buy food and put shoes on their kids' feet and have health care and take a week off every once in a while and still get paid. And maybe even get to see a psychologist when you need it. We're not there. I hope that's clear by now. Looking around, I suspect you all knew that. We're not there, and here's why it matters. Until we get to the point where workers don't have to go on strike to prove to themselves and corporate America that they are in fact worth more, we are going to lag behind our global neighbors in creating a peaceful and equitable society. Michael Collins from the Institute for Economics and Peace began this conference with an address entitled "Positive Peace, Empowering the Peace Builder we each have within." I want to close by returning to a couple of important measures that he shared with us in that address. The Institute for Economics and Peace puts together every year a ranking known as the Global Peace Index. This is a listing of 163 states and territories ranked by their degree of peacefulness. According to the Institute, the most peaceful countries on earth have these characteristics, which they call the 8 pillars of positive peace. And obviously, the pillar most germane to this talk is that one up in the upper right, equitable distribution of resources. Peaceful countries have equitable distribution of resources. I would submit to you that while that's the most germane of all of these measures, all of these pillars are pretty interdependent, right? A living wage would create a more sound business environment, for instance. It's very clear that the business plan of an awful lot of sectors of our economy depends upon paying people less money than they can live on, and that's not a sound business plan, right? It's clear that a significant number of American workers have decided they actually don't want to continue to work for poverty wages in an environment that got even less hospitable during the pandemic. So whole industries in this country are going to need to rethink those portions of their business model that rely upon the inequitable distribution of resources between shareholders, owners, and workers. So looking at these pillars, anybody want to guess where or remember from the talk in September? Anybody remember where the US falls on the 2021 Global Peace Institute Index? Yeah, everybody's going. They're saying down. 122 of 163. 122. And there are a lot of reasons for that, and they're probably not all economic. One of the important factors is militarism. So that's always going to pull us down a bit. But I want to show you a couple of tables. So here's the first section of the Global Peace Index. And can you see it well enough? Can you see the countries? So these are the first countries, the most peaceful countries, Iceland at the top, then New Zealand. You might even be able to guess. These 8 of the 10 are in Europe. And this is the top 20 countries with the highest minimum wage. This is not a great measure because minimum wage is really relative to a country's economics. But if you set the countries with that pay the best wages next to the most peaceful countries, you'll notice a lot of crossover, and maybe you won't be that surprised. It's not a perfect crossover because, for instance, Iceland, which is the most peaceful country, doesn't have a minimum wage. So they don't appear on the minimum wage list at all. But Iceland sets their wages with collective bargaining from sector to sector. So Iceland does pay a living wage. They just don't have they don't need a minimum wage because they have collective bargaining across sectors. And a couple of the countries that are on the minimum wage list aren't on the global peace list because of the ways that people are counted. But there's a great deal of crossover here. The most peaceful places are also places that don't make people feel trapped by low wage work. Overall, countries where workers are paid a living wage are places that rank higher on scales of peacefulness. And the challenges of being part of the working poor have a deleterious effect on personal and communal safety. And a couple of studies to back that up. So professor of social epidemiology, Daniel Kim at Northeastern University, did a study on gun violence in neighborhoods and found that neighborhoods with higher levels of poverty had a 7% higher rate of gun homicide. And conversely, an increase in social mobility led to a 25% reduction in gun homicide. Why not have it? Oh, I do not have a slide for this. A recent study also found that an increase in the minimum wage of $1, thank you, Daniel. Daniel pointed me to this study, reduced suicide rates among the lowest wage earners by 3.4 to 5.9%. We have seen in these years of working with low-wage worker, the effect on their mental health, and we have lost workers to suicide. A simple raise in the minimum wage actually reduces suicide by a significant percent. And having heard what Bridget had to say about what it was like living under the economic strain of being a low-wage worker, that probably isn't too surprising. Low wages, along with the gap in wages between men and women, also can contribute to higher levels of domestic violence. According to an article by Equal Pay Massachusetts, it's been observed that over 95% of domestic violence incidents occur in households whose incomes are less than $75,000. That this is Massachusetts, so $75,000 is less money there. Additionally, those households with the lowest income bracket are 15% more likely to experience domestic violence than those in the highest income brackets. Likewise, women who earn less than $10,000 a year demonstrate domestic violence at a rate 5 times higher than women who earn more than $30,000 a year. There are more studies and there are lots more statistics, but I don't think I have to convince any of you that the grinding poverty created by low-wage work in this country and the conditions that lead workers to feel trapped are a recipe for negative peace, for violence, for suicide, for disease, and for dis-ease. We have a problem in our country, and it's a problem for all of us. It's a problem that makes us not only less safe, but less secure in our future. It's an old saying, if you want peace, work for justice. It's an old and true saying. The most basic justice is built upon a foundation of equity. The simplest thing that we could do in this country to help every community, every single one, is to pay people enough money to meet their basic needs. It's really that simple. To pay people enough money to live beyond desperation would lift every community in this country. It would create real justice, and real justice is the foundation of real peace. So if you want to work for justice, but aren't sure where to start, here are some resources. I'm happy to share these slides. Some resources that I used for this talk, and here are some great organizations. Most of them local. Stand Up KC, we've talked about. Heartland Center for Jobs and Freedom works with economic law and has been doing a lot of work with tenants in Kansas City, as we've seen housing fall further and further out of reach for more people in our town. Missouri Jobs with Justice has a local chapter and chapters across the state. Pace Bene is Father Louis and Keith's organization. And the Institute for Economics and Peace, I put Michael Collins on there because now we've brought it all back home. So, questions? What do you want to say? Tavis?
I'm reading from the chat that's been brought up.
Yes, what do they got?
From Stephen. For an excellent presentation. Question. What would you say are the strengths and weaknesses of the news media coverage of the fight for media that allies are
I'm looking at the executive director of Stand Up KC. My sense is that the news media have covered Stand Up, and Stand Up is what I know best, but have covered the Fight for 15 well. I think the Fight for 15 has done a very fine job of allowing media to do their job and of getting information out there, because this is the economic justice and changing the wage situation and the wealth gap in this country is in many ways about changing hearts and minds. You know, we have the political will now, we don't have the political power. That seems to be a major problem in this country, right? We have a lot more will than power. But in my opinion, Stephen, the news media have been largely a positive effect. I don't know, Daniel, you're in the room.
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of times media and influence it has, but I think as organizers, we have to ask ourselves what we can do to demonstrate and to gain the attention, and workers have done that by going on strike, by marching in the streets, by inviting allies, by being willing, as Bridget did, to tell their stories.
Yeah.
I think we've seen that when workers are willing to do that, their stories, you know, are put out to the public, and it's a great effect. So I think you're right. Totally agree.
Yeah, and that's, let's see if I can get back to the. So you can see from these pictures who leads this movement, and it is workers. And the fact that workers do tell their own stories.
There's been a request that Daniel repeat some of the comments. Since you're too far away from the mic, which is up by Donna right now. So she can reiterate what I said.
So yes, I think I started to. Daniel was just sharing that what has been really powerful in the fight for 15 has been workers sharing their stories, and the media have actually wanted to hear those stories. So, you know.
I guess what I wonder is whether the media are doing an effective job. Because if it were effective, then we wouldn't have the pushback that's occurring in Washington, D.C. on some of President Biden's programs. If it were effective, we wouldn't have the top and the bottom wording that leaves people at the bottom, and there's no movement. If it were effective, would we have allowed market forces to try to move the needle when it hasn't really done that?
Right. Right. The whole story certainly has not been told. The story that's been told in this country is that we require a permanent underclass in order to keep the wheels of American capitalism moving. I don't think that that's overstated. You know, and you'll hear people repeat all the time these myths. I had a slide and I took it out, you know, myths about low wage work. But, you know, when we first started this, when this movement started, people said $15 an hour was crazy. And now we're already starting to try to move beyond $15 an hour. But people said you cannot pay people that because you'll bankrupt all of these companies. You know, they pay $20 an hour at McDonald's in Denmark, and it's a blip in the cost of a Big Mac. Companies can adjust prices however they want. They adjust them so that their shareholders make a lot of money, and that's the story that has. We seem to have no will to change the wealth gap, which is fueled largely by people who are working at the bottom. You know, 44% of people who are providing the economic engine for Jeff Bezos to go to the moon. He didn't go to the moon.
When you take a look at the difference in this country, and most places that have this, it seems to mirror the urban rural
divide. So the question is, following Thomas Frank's, what's wrong with Kansas? What is wrong with rural America that it continues to be influenced by the party that does not represent specifics?
Yeah. So the question is, we have seen change and we have seen wages go to $15 an hour in places like Seattle. And where wages are growing is largely, let me stop me if I'm not paraphrasing this correctly, largely urban areas. So larger metropolitan areas are changing. Now, some would argue that costs may be higher there, but it's absolutely true. There's a grinding poverty in rural areas. And yet it's rural areas who seem to lack the political will to change what's happening in our, I'm trying to be really careful. I don't know why I'm being careful, I never am. It's rural areas largely who return to power, people who vote to keep wages low, who vote to do all kinds of things that do not help workers in this country. To keep people from being allowed to have vacations and family leave and all of the things that almost every other developed country has now.
Jeanette is asking, could you please give us a few responses to give to those who say it will bankrupt the economy?
No, it won't. It's an argument in a vacuum, right? We're always arguing about what will happen when we do the thing that we don't have the temerity to do. And for whatever reason, we can't look at, I said, in all across Europe, and it's not just Europe. It's South America where there are places that pay a living wage and they haven't lost their economies. And if we go back to that, to the early slide that showed the wealth gap, the only reason that the wealth gap is the way that it is because we have had no problem just shoveling money at the richest 20%, 10%, 5%, 1% of Americans. So, if you pulled that line down a little bit, you could pay everybody. But we haven't had the political will to allow people to make a living wage. The places where they have, Seattle is still here. People were sure that terrible things were going to happen in the places that went to $15 an hour. They're all fine. Seattle's doing just fine. San Francisco's doing just fine. And the unemployment rate did not increase. And what has, now we have inflation, and it doesn't have anything to do with wages. That's probably not fair to say it doesn't have anything to do with wages, but the primary factor is not wages. Louis?
I saw an article this week that spoke to if wages for fast food workers were to increase to $15 an hour, it would roughly equal the pay for starting teachers.
Yeah.
And so part of the stress, I guess, on the economy is if you increase one, you have to increase the other, and then the other. So your thoughts on that?
The people ordinary people, let's just say that, ordinary people who don't vacation in San Moritz, take the money that they make and put it back into the economy. And that's true to the midpoint of the wage scale. When low wage workers make money, they put their money back into the community. When teachers make money, they put their money back into the community. So if we raise all the boats We just raise all the boats. The money goes back. It actually would be great. It's economic stimulus to pay people more money. Their money stays in the community. When we keep their wages low, by giving money to the people at the very top of the wage scale, the money comes out of the community. This is all very well documented. You know, the money comes out of, well, we just had what was it called? The Pandora Papers. If you've looked at that, none of us knew the extent to which rich people were hiding their money. But we all did know that it was coming out of communities. The money that we pay, you know, and so the thinking behind saying, well, now fast food workers are going to make what teachers make is that fast food workers somehow don't deserve to make what someone with a bachelor's makes teaching. And first of all, I've never understood the idea that there should be people in this country who don't make enough money to live on it. We should say that there is work that doesn't have value, because that's not the American promise. This country has never promised people that their work won't have value. And what we pay teachers is a crime. You know, and what we pay ambulance drivers and paramedics is a crime, because I've seen the same argument made there. You know, well, paramedics are making $15 an hour. Well, that's ridiculous.
Following up on that, what does it say about society? When you look at, you mentioned teachers, look at the situation of backgrounds of colleges and universities. It used to be colleges and universities were over 70% full staff. Now I think it's under 30%. So 0.5% of backgrounds qualifying for assistance. And in the meantime, look at CEOs making on average 240%, 240 times the average worker in 1970s. But what does it say about the society?
Well, it tells you what we value. A simple survey of this country will tell you what we value. We don't value children. We don't value education. We don't value a lot of work. We do value money, yeah, and we value ownership. We somehow place a premium on owning things. So if you own things, you deserve to have obscene amounts of money. And what? And praise. Yes, you can get yourself elected president. Now I'm really in trouble.
I think that this is a strategy by people in opposition raising minimum wage to pit us against each other.
Absolutely.
And one thing I would say about teachers and healthcare workers and many others that unfortunately are not being paid what they should be paid for the service they render. They have guaranteed minimum work weeks, right?
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Whereas fast food workers not being recognized on the large scale something we're working on, but there is so much disparity, and I think that we ought to recognize that it is the frequent tactic by the opposition to pit us against each other. So we're fighting for the same vote,
Right.
when we ought to be, you know, as you said, rising tide raises the sun.
No, that's absolutely right. It's a facile argument to compare wages as if that's the only facet of employment. Yeah, that's a really good point. We are wrapping it up. Thank you all online. Thank you all here. Appreciate your thoughts. And as I said, if anyone wants to have further conversation, I would be grateful.
You can welcome them to your church on Sunday.
And we're here at 10:30 every Sunday, having a good old time. I'm not kidding. Thank you.